All right, everybody ready? We call the Northfield Township Planning Commission for April 2nd to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Mr. Thomas, you want to call the roll for us, please?
Certainly. Ms. Chick is absent. Ms. Ganem? Here. Mr. Gordon?
Here.
Ms. Matthews?
Present.
Mr. Stanleychko?
Present.
Mr. Thomas is present. Mr. Zarzecki is not.
Ms. Chick is absent with notice.
Okay.
All right. I make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Support.
Who's the support?
Thomas.
Motion by Stanleychko, support by Thomas, to support the agenda as presented. Any discussion? All right. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right, the motion carries. All right, we're going to move on to the call of the public. If you'd like to come up and speak, please make sure you're speaking clearly into the microphone. And you have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Steve Grono from Chestnut Development. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, now, see, if you're on the TV, that means it's picking up your mouth. So,
Okay, great, thank you. So the last time we were here, regarding our projects, the chair asked for a study to be done by Tetra Tech to clarify sewer capacity and assure the Planning Commission, give them the data that they need to make good decisions about what's being proposed. The Board of Trustees then put a specific scope of work out for Tetra Tech. And Tetra Tech has the draft report submitted to the township trustees, and it's in your packet tonight. When we received the draft report, we read it over to verify that it was accurate or that it represented the true state of what the sewer capacities are. And what I try to do is put myself in the position of the Planning Commission and say, based on this report, what am I going to think? So when I read the report, what I'm going to think is we need Chestnut and Robertson to put $8.4 million in upsizing pipe before we can approve their plans, which of course would be a showstopper for everything, and everything would fold up and go away. There'd be no way we were going to put that kind of money into improving the pipe at this point in time. However, 2 questions need to be answered. One is, for the existing SAD district, do we have an obligation to reserve our reuse at the plant for those people? That's a legal question that we've posed to the township. Your attorney is reviewing that, including reviewing the SAD actual documents signed in 2000 by those people. Did that document obligate the township to hold our reuse or obligations in reserve in perpetuity forever? In our understanding, the only way an REU can be reserved if it's purchased, and that's what we're trying to get answered in the Monday meeting definitively, so that you'll know once and for all, do we have to save these REUs or don't we? Or is it first come, first serve for who's in the district? We're in the district. We know that we have enough REUs to cover our proposed projects, and we are not even approaching the 1,200 REUs that Mr. Rubel's already agreed is available. In any event, all of the research that's necessary to revise the report that you're looking at tonight is in the works. We're hoping Mr. Rubel will look at our data, what we found out. Brad's been at every address for everyone in the SAD. We know exactly how many REUs are going to the pump station. We know how many gallons are going to the pump station. And we know what the capacity is. So we're hoping that your engineer agrees with all this data that is not contained in this report. The last thing I'll leave you with is, if you want to look at the front page of the Tetra Tech report, the proposed REU count for what Mr. Rubel has presented in the report is a total between Chestnut, Woodfield Farms, Robertson Brothers, and the Groves of 1,159 REUs. The actual count is 794. So we know that we got some math to rerun here in the calculations to get our gallons and our pipe sizing. And all we're asking is patience that once we have the meeting on Monday, which I hope members of the Planning Commission will attend to hear all of the data that we've provided to Mr. Rubel, then they'll agree that this report should look very different the next time you see it in its final form. That's our hope. The legal question will be answered about obligation. and the capacity answer can be answered accurately by your engineer. So that's all. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you very much.
I have more, and I'll hang around
Yeah.
to the section.
Okay, thank you. Sir, would you like to come up to say anything? No. This is a call to the public. Okay. All right, seeing how there's nobody else to call to the public, any clarifications? All right. We have no correspondence, no public hearings, report of the committees. Did everybody receive Ms. Chick's review of the township board meeting? Any questions on that? I'm not going to read it into the record. It doesn't get into the record anyhow, but if somebody would like that, we can provide that to them. Zoning Board of Appeals, Mr. Zarzecki is not here, so we don't have a report. Would you like to say anything, Julie?
I don't have anything new, but in regards to the zoning board of appeals meeting and upcoming meeting, for the table at absolute storage.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jackson?
I've got nothing other than.
Okay, great. Parks and Rec?
Yeah. Parks and Rec met 2 weeks ago. We are mostly working on the allocation of funds that we have from grants. We're working on the park this week, or last week or 2 weeks ago. We're working on the gravel lot, adding parking spaces, and they're allocating about $25K to that. That includes like wood chips and gravel. We are also looking at picnic tables, bike racks, disc golf signs, and the main park sign for the front, along with tables. And so all of that, we've allocated about $30,000 for that. They're talking about wood chips, handicap toilet, and I think that's the majority of what we talked about.
Great. Any questions? Okay, great, thank you. And Mr. Gordon, land preservation.
Yeah, the land preservation met last night. We're still working to finalize a draft of a letter to the Planning Commission about participating in the rewrite of the master plan. We should have that to you by our next meeting of the Planning Commission. And we're also working on trying to put together a presentation for both the Planning Commission and the Board of Trustees about the status of land preservation in our community right now. And that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Gordon? All right, great, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to number 10, which is unfinished business, and that is master plan and sewer capacity discussion. So, Mr. Jackson, the floor is yours. Just make sure you speak into the microphone.
You're gonna line. Thank you. We're excited to be back here again and talk about the master plan. Obviously, the township's been experiencing a lot of development pressure of different kinds, and so this is an opportune time to dive into the master plan. And there's a few things that we wanted to go over today that more or less reflects our approach, given the fact that this is not an entire master plan rewrite, but more of a sort of a surgical approach. So we wanted to talk a little bit about our methodology and how we're going to approach it. We also want to make sure that you guys have enough time tonight to sort of give us some input in terms of what you'd like to see come out of this process. And so that's kind of the dialogue I want to get into tonight. But generally speaking, we're going to focus a lot on the area in and around the sewer service area to determine what kind of growth and development the township can expect, to try to give the township some predictability about what that development may look like. So, we've heard a lot of terminology or comments over the last several months about the character of Northfield Township, rural character, things of that nature. So we're going to really try to work hard on quantifying what that looks like so that it can translate and align in terms of the zoning, so that when developers come in, we can say, if you do this, you shouldn't have a problem. Follow these rules, shouldn't be a problem. So not as much ambiguity, not as much discretionary input and things like that, so you can get from point A to point B in a predictable and defensible manner. We do want to build in some flexibility in the plan, and so we'll kind of go over what that might look like, because there are changes in the market. More importantly, there's changes in terms of what the township needs in terms of types of housing or types of services or types of commercial uses and things like that. So we want to build in some flexibility as well, as long as the final outcome is something that's predictable in terms of, again, the character of it, and also the impacts. And when I talk about the impacts, I'm talking about the economic impacts, making sure that the cost for providing services to the future uses is offset by the value of those uses in terms of tax revenue generation, the impacts on the environmental areas of the township. We've talked a lot about that in terms of the areas of the township that we want to preserve and maintain. And we talked a lot about in terms of our approach to preserving natural features throughout the township. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we balance that. And also, again, going back to sort of the social impacts in terms of making sure we're consistent with the community character and what you guys want to see here. And there's ways to do that in terms of developing sort of development standards, which would include something as simple as landscaping along the frontage of these different uses to provide some sort of continuity. So you know that when you're driving down North Territorial or Whitmore Lake Road, that you're in Northfield Township, or it's at least consistent with the image of Northfield Township. So we're going to work on sort of specifically identifying what those elements are.
Mark, if you'll hit the click share button on the screen there, so Noah can share his presentation. Click share. Yep.
So the way we're approaching this is we're really going to focus on the future land use plan. There's a lot of aspects to the master plan, including the goals and objectives, but we're going to start right in with the future land use plan, because I think that's going to raise questions that need to be answered that may end up back in terms of refining the goals and objectives. Also, I'm sure that out of our analysis and deep dive into the future land use plan, there's going to be implementation measures that have to be taken in terms of things like updates to the zoning ordinance, impact on how the township delivers services, whether it's obviously the sewer service area, but also other services that the township provides. So as we go through the future land use plan, we're really going to focus on quantifying the impacts that come out of the various future land use scenarios. We're going to look in detail at the existing land uses. Obviously, you guys can't read this, but it was in your handout to determine, where are we seeing changes in land use? Also, what are the predominant land uses? What are some of the major land uses there in that chart?
Yeah, so this, I believe this table was brought up from SEMCOG, right?
Yeah.
So, some of the kind of characteristic land uses for the township are obviously, agricultural and rural residential, so your farms, your large lot single homes, your recreational and preservation open space. And then, of course, once you get closer to Whitmore Lake and around the North Territorial US 23 area, you're seeing a lot more single-family residential. And then with recent developments, you have more attached single-family, like townhomes, and kind of higher density residential. And then again, around kind of the Whitmore Lake areas where you see more, where a lot of the retail and office space is concentrated. And then farther on US 23 is where you're seeing more of industrial and institutional uses.
So this existing land use list of acreages really reinforces the fact that Northfield Township is predominantly large rural residential, agricultural, and open spaces. I think when I combined some of those categories, it came out to 76%. I've been saying pretty much all along about 75%. And part of this master plan process will be reinforcing that and having more definitive boundaries of where growth is going to go and where it's not going to go, so that we don't have to have that policy discussion during development reviews, that we have a relatively well understood area where the township will support appropriate growth and development, and areas where they're going to hold the line with respect to preservation and that sort of thing.
And something I'll add to that really quickly is, while we're doing a cursory analysis of land area and land value, kind of using the 2018, land use data as a base, what we were seeing was that for agricultural land, about 30% of all taxable land value in the township is for areas that were designated as ag, and then the only thing higher than that, at about 34%, was single-family residential. So kind of recognizing and trying to maintain and boost the synergy between those is going to be really important for the future land use plan and the master plan overall.
Oh, one of the things that, if you don't mind this, is anybody has any questions along each slide, is rather than going back afterwards. So one of the things I wanted to find out about this existing land use, that's obviously 2020. You're going through and going to give us an update to 2025. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about doing.
Yeah, we'll go in and update it based on recent developments. Obviously, Chestnut is a new change to the land use, and we'll make those kind of changes and other ones.
So I hate these colored maps because they blur out, but I think for me, seeing if you can do this, where each one of these categories fits into a map of our township is, as a general rule, just so that when we look at something as a map, we can clarify and go, okay, this is where the attached condo housings are, because I don't know where they're at. What's just for an overview for us, and maybe to include that in the master plan itself, so that somebody can look at it and say, okay, this is where those go. Does that make sense?
100%.
Thank you. Anybody else want to say anything? Mr. Gordon?
Yes, I had some questions. When you look at acres, I don't know, acres is one way to measure things, and then there's, other ways to measure it. I know in the current master plan, it shows that there's been a tremendous loss of agricultural land and a tremendous increase in residential development. But that's the 2019 plan, and there's even a disclaimer in there that their categories might have been switched up a little bit, so you can't really look at those numbers accurately. When I look at this, which I figure is page 3, essentially, on your presentation, I think there are page numbers on some of the pages, and they're missing on others. I don't know why they went away. It's very helpful to have them. Where would apartments fit here? Where would you, figuring the number of acres that an apartment takes up really doesn't tell you much in terms of.
You're looking at the table that's on the screen.
Yeah, I'm looking at this table, yeah.
So that would be under multiple family housing.
That's apartments? Okay.
That's apartments.
All right.
That's apartments and attached condos and all kinds of, multiple unit type development. And the acreage, of course, isn't the acreage of the square footage of the buildings.
Right.
It's the land area that they occupy.
Right. What's TCU down toward the bottom? I don't know what that means.
Yeah, that's transportation, circulation, and utilities.
Okay. There's no category for preserved property, which might be helpful in this
Based,
document.
I was just going to say, I think based on the way this is structured, it looks like it probably does fit under agricultural and rural residential, and then there's some of it that's recreational and open space, but since it's only a couple dozen acres and compared to, almost 20,000, it probably mostly is under there. And it might blend over, but we'll also kind of go over into what's been identified as preservation space.
This is SEMCOG's information, so we'll probably develop one that is more suited specifically to Northfield Township, which would have some of those things like permanently preserved open space.
Great. On the previous page, it looks like a lot of this information is also on page 8. So there were just a couple questions, but I can hold off until we get to page 8 on that, especially reserving the demand and the rural character. So yeah, cool, thank you.
So this is the future the existing land use map that's in your current master plan that will update based on development that we've seen since then.
So I had one question about the map. When we get this thing in your final form, can we get a lot bigger maps than this? Because they're really kind of hard to see what's what at this scale.
Typically, we would do them at 11 by 17. Is that big enough for something bigger?
11 feet by 17 feet? That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
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 A little bigger than that would be great.
In going along with what Mr. Gordon says is that, I don't know, we keep getting this feedback. Anyways, I personally, I don't mind these, even though I still need to use these things just to read anymore, but even with these, it's kind of hard to read. So if we could have when we're talking about these, something that is maybe a little, not printed out on an inkjet printer or stuff, maybe a more higher resolution, at least for us for us to use when we're talking about this, and we'll just keep them, so that way we can have something to distinguish this better. I think that would be helpful.
And I also think, looking at the whole township is a little bit of a challenge. And I think because we're probably going to be spending a lot of our time talking about a smaller portion of the township, we can do some blow-ups and look at specific areas that will allow us to look at parcels and things like that.
Right, I mean, the areas that's east of, I don't know what the road is, I can't read it, but we're mostly, it's ag, and there's really not much else in there. I don't think we need to have that as blown up as we do the areas that we're going to be concentrating on for the development, just so we can get the clarification of those. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
The bright yellow area that you have single-family housing, I think, I don't quite understand that, because, for instance, I can look at my parcel, and I have a house on that parcel, but it's not the bright yellow, it's just listed as ag. And I'm sure there's many, many more in there of those smaller parcels that are 5, 10, 20 acre parcels where there is a single-family home on it.
It may be a combination of lot size and zoning, so we'll have to look at what went into the determination of that land use classification. Because, yeah, there's definitely, I see ones in the ag area that are definitely lotted out for residential development. So I'll have to.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Are we good? All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So again, this is the future land use plan. This is going to be our starting point. I've said this repeatedly, 75% is an ag. The area we're going to focus on is the area sort of in the northwest quadrant of the township, and probably even more specifically, the areas around the interchange at North Territorial. I do want to make sure we talk about the downtown area and make sure that the master plan accurately reflects the direction the township wants to go with respect to its policies in that area, because again, this master plan will have some policy recommendations. So we want to make sure that we're good position with respect to that area. So to generalize, and again, your existing master plan does this with the 3 sub-areas, but we know the agricultural and open space areas are going to be preserved. We know that the township wants to encourage a successful and thriving downtown area, so that would be a priority where I think the township would want to be sort of initiate some improvements in that area. There's areas in the township that, due to development over the years, needs to have services. Otherwise, there's going to be negative impacts on water quality and things like that. So environmental areas that need to be protected. So that's an area we want to continue to document and preserve. But the area that I believe we're going to spend time on is the area where you're experiencing the growth pressure around that interchange, to determine what is it going to look like? What do you want it to look like? And based on what you want it to look like, do we have the regulations in place to get you there, to get what you want without negotiating, along the way? And also, do you have the infrastructure to support it? And if there needs to be infrastructure improvements to support it, road improvements, utility improvements, so forth, how are those funded? Are they, obviously you have to plan ahead for, infrastructure improvements. And so then how are those funded? So those are things that we're going to get to the bottom of through looking at this future land use plan. Any questions on that?
No, but that you brought up a good point, is that actually I've had a couple discussions with some people about that. It's like, there is no policy right now that there needs to be about, at certain stage, who pays for what. Because right now it's an open-ended question, and it needs to be cleared up. Yes, yep. It needs to be clarified and a policy put in place by the board so that that marries up to what it is we're working with. So they already know that there's some stuff that needs to happen there.
We have the sewer has gotten a lot of discussion, but we also have non-motorized facilities that we want to see, in a logical way through the township, and, doing them piecemeal. You end up with some areas deteriorating before other areas are even built. So, it needs to be a logical and well-initiated way, even if it involves recapturing some of those investments in the future, or, other methods for doing that.
Mr. Gordon?
Mr. Jackson, I really do appreciate the work that you guys have put together on this.
There's always a but.
So please don't take any of my, questions as criticisms necessarily. When you mentioned, we want to do something unique in terms of making our zoning and our vision in the master plan work for the areas that we have along the highway that are designated as overlay districts, especially at this point. How do you turn a highway interchange into something more than that? How do you make it a community? Because all it is right now is going to be a bunch of apartment buildings and a couple of fast food joints. How has that become a community? That's why I think in a lot of ways with the master plan that we have, the one you worked on for 2019, we wanted to direct the residential development toward Whitmore Lake, because having that concentration of people there will then enable businesses to be more successful in that area. I don't know how you do it at a highway interchange, and so I'm looking forward to your ideas on that.
And I got a lot of them.
Good, great.
Yeah, so now what we're going to do is, make sure it's picking up.
They don't have these slides.
Right, so these were things that we put together kind of leading up to this meeting, but so I can kind of go through these slowly. Full disclosure, I do talk fast, so just please let me know if I need to slow down at all. But These are basically just kind of a breakdown of those categories, looking at what was put together for the 2019 master plan and kind of seeing, where those lie now and what that could potentially look like. So I will caveat this that these are pretty heavy estimated numbers, but these are kind of like forecasts of what could potentially come from these uses and what things might be needed, and then how they align with the zoning ordinance, kind of going from least intense to most intense land use. So, and then I can also flip back to the map for reference points. So the first one, and by least intense, I also mean kind of the most restrictive on what can be built there, is recreation and conservation. What you'll see throughout these headers is that at the top, that's the number of parcels that are currently there that have that future land use classification, and then the total amount of acreage. So as I was saying, it's a bit less, but there's more that goes into it than, that would be more than what is currently shown by SEMCOG. And so it can support a maximum potentially of about 1,100 residents, but still at a low density and with a lower sewage effluent rate. And where that comes from is a lot of this is pulled from the 2015 sewer study. And then we also updated some of the numbers with what was just reviewed last week. And so we're looking at, how much sewage may be produced per acre, and then also how much parkland would be required or would be recommended per resident based on what's put together by the NERPA, is the National Recreation Parks Association?
Yep.
Okay. And so that's broken down into like mini parks, like little pocket parks, playgrounds, neighborhood parks that are a little bit more substantial, and then community parks that are a little bit more regional.
One question.
Yep.
So the parcels you're talking about here, are they within the sewer district?
So
So.
some are, some aren't, but these ones are not. All the recreation, all the ag parcels are outside of the district.
So we're going to go through each land use. Each land use is going to have a slide like this.
Right.
Okay.
So this is strictly related to the recreation conservation. And the reason why there's any sewer coming from this is probably, why? Because there's probably a couple parcels that are served by sewer, maybe?
Maybe. I mean, this is, because again, this covers the township broadly, and then as we're refining the future land use plan for the new master plan, that's going to have it broken down between what's outside the sewer district and what's within it, because that does change, especially density.
That's why I asked that question, because the REU's up there. I'm like, if that's not near the sewer or attached to the sewer, then that shouldn't even be in there.
Right.
It's virtually zero.
Okay.
Right.
It's essentially zero in this area.
Yeah, and again, that's just what's out of the sewer study, so I don't know if that's for the few parcels that are connected to the sewer system or what's measured in septic, just based on the land use. And then for zoning, most of the districts here are pretty aligned. So for this one, it's the RC district. And then some things you'll notice with this is that it says the maximum potential number of parcels is far lower than how many are actually there. And a large part of that is because most of these parcels are under that 10-acre limit. They're technically non-conforming lots. But since most of this is recreation land anyways, usually that's not an issue for development. And then for agricultural, which, again, makes up most of the township, again, you're seeing similar numbers. These are all outside of the sewer district. And this aligns with the AR district as far as, the alignment between future land use plan and the zoning ordinance. And then again, it's kept out so that this maintains the lower density of the area, but there's a little bit more development that can be supported because the minimum land size is smaller. And so you can have traditional ag, you can also have single-family residential. And a big part of working through this process and developing the zoning plan, which is going to kind of strengthen that refinement between, or that relationship between the future land use map and the ordinance, is to see what are going to be the most appropriate uses to kind of meet the goals of each land use class. So the zoning ordinance currently allows agribusiness and things for like growing trees or plant nurseries. It also allows, sawmills. It allows large-scale institutional uses. And so questions that we're going to kind of work with the Planning Commission and other committees on, like the Land Preservation Committee, is are those appropriate within that district, or should sawmills be in something that's a little bit more intensive, like industrial, just as an example, to make sure that everything kind of matches up more.
So again, these,
All these slides are, you're going to
make them for
Yes,
us.
yep, yep. And so again, I just want to mention that these aren't all based on what's in the sewer district and what's out. We did crunch those numbers. It's just we gotta make sure they're refined and as accurate as possible. So for low-density residential, that's kind of the area that's, mostly what's both within and surrounding the sewer district, and then you have these other subdivision pockets that are kind of in the central and southeast parts of the township. And that's where you have most of your large lot, single-family residential. It's where you have a bit more sewage output. Some of that's on-site septic, some of that's not. And then I was just going to say that depending, and this is also where you can see some duplexes, and then you just have those different land area requirements based on if you're in the district or not.
This is one of those areas where I think we have an opportunity to clarify in the zoning ordinance what our growth management policy is, because right now you've got you've got zoning districts that have two different densities. So one district, and if you're in the sewer district, you get higher density than if you're not in the same zoning district. So, and I think, in other words, you get higher density in the same zoning district, which is a lot different character than the lower density in the same zoning district, depending on whether you have sewer or not. So I think we need to start to say we want to develop neighborhoods in these areas that will be served by sewer, neighborhoods with a certain residential development characteristic. And then we have larger lots, and those neighborhoods may be, smaller lots that are more or less reflected in the density if you're served by sewer, versus those areas in the same zoning district with larger lots will have a completely different character. And so those should really be different zoning districts with different development standards.
One of the things I noticed on this, the future land use map is where I live, which is right near Wildwood Lake. I live just south of there. That's listed down here as medium-density residential. I don't know how that can be, because everybody has 5 acres, and some people are just building new houses on there. And I'm like, that makes no sense that ends up, because there's no way for that to happen. I see no way for that to happen. That's actually there's not like big parcels of property that people can buy up. Everybody's got houses on it, so.
Yeah, and there will be adjustments like that,
Yeah.
that made to the future land use plan for sure.
I'm like, I didn't even know, I'm looking at that, I'm going, how the heck did that even get in there? Because nobody's going to be selling, multiple lots and selling to somebody. There's no way for sewer to go down there, so. Anyways, all right, I didn't want to hijack that, sorry.
Those are the kind of questions we
Right.
want to get.
I'm sure you're aware of this, but most of Washtenaw County, certainly in this area, if you're not on sewer, you're not going to be able to put up low density, one every 2.5 acres, because you won't have anything but clay. You'd be real lucky to find a sand to even put up a house on every 2 acres. So, when I think about the master plan and some statements that we could put in there, I mean, in terms of the sewer district, we could simply say, we discourage any kind of development of high-density residential or medium-density residential in areas that are outside the current sewer district. Boom. And all the rest of this, like you're saying, that's maybe listed as medium density, and even low density. I don't even know where we have low density. If you don't have sewers, you're not going to build there unless you can find sand.
Right, and these are the things that we're going to be working to really figure out the best way to put these things in. So, there's that really critical relationship between the future land use map specifically and the master plan more broadly with the zoning ordinance, with the zoning ordinance being the means to achieve what's set out in the future land use plan. So if we want to look at, for example, that medium density set of parcels south of Wildwood Lake, if that is not the best fit and it should be less dense based on existing land use characteristics, that's something that we can incorporate, because as it stands now, if you're going to go for a rezoning, for example, to set that to be, to redesignate that as SR 2, where you have a much smaller lot size, you can, argue that it fits with the master plan to keep it at a lower density residential area based on, on these density requirements. And then without the sewer system, if you're on a septic system outside of the district, there is a much larger lot requirement. It's anywhere from 2 to 4 times the size if you're single family or duplex. So those kinds of things kind of also help within the language of the zoning ordinance to kind of maintain that. Okay. And then again, just going in the medium density residential, from there, that's most of these houses. It includes duplexes, but generally within the township is just single family homes that are a little bit packed close or more closely packed together. And so there's still most of your traditional homes. There's just smaller yards between them. They can be duplexes, but these aren't things like townhomes. These aren't things like, small like garden apartments or anything. These are still mostly single-family homes. It's just that there is a higher density to them. And, again, with this kind of feedback, or helps us kind of work with the commission to steer where those should go with respect to community character and sewer access.
I threw out the term neighborhood, pretty quickly earlier, but this land use, may relate closer to that than other land uses. You have narrow lots, which, is higher density, is more consistent with a neighborhood environment, but you also have design considerations then as well. If it's not done properly, you'll end up with a subdivision where all the houses are dominated by a garage that projects out 10, 15 feet in front of the house. You can't see where the entrance is. And that's really not consistent with a well-designed neighborhood. It's not consistent with the neighborhoods you already have in the community. And I don't think it's consistent with the image of future neighborhoods you'd like to see. So that's why we put some of these images up here where you have garages that are either recessed with porches that project out in front, or maybe you have side-loaded garages. That's a little more challenging on these narrower lots. But something that diminishes the impact and improves the quality of life within that area.
Can I ask if we could potentially have a map with the current and the future sewer district areas laid out? Because it's kind of hard, like when I'm looking at your medium and low-density housing, and we're talking about some having sewer, some not. Is there a future extension of that on some of the main roads where you do see some of the low-density housing? And you had mentioned that some have sewer, some not. I don't know how they could if there's no extension, so I'd like to see a map of the current and future.
Yeah, absolutely. Every map we'll have moving forward will have the sewer district as reflected in the last master plan. That's the only district that we know that has been, formally acted on, with the exception of some parcels have been added to it. So we'll add those to it to show.
Do you happen to, since we're talking about this, do you happen to have the ability with your graphics to do layers?
Yep.
So we can end up seeing, if we want to see something, you could just see,
Yeah, an
just do it
overlay.
like that, we can see exactly where that's at.
Existing land use.
And that would end up being, that would be a lot, I think that graphic would end up being a lot easier if we could look at it and say, where's this
Yeah.
at? And we could see that layer, and then, okay, now layer something else over the top so we can see where it all fits into.
If we can get it on a D-size print at least, and then we can keep them here with us if we need to refer to them.
Yeah, this map up here, the existing land use, we did put a version of the sewer district on this map just to show you what it may eventually look like with each map moving forward. So here's the sewer district map on here. Yep.
I'm wondering what kind of presentation capabilities your offices have. If we're talking about small maps for us in front of us here and layers that we're actually peeling back, do you have the technology computer-wise that if we went to you you could project everything on a big screen and we have a nice meeting where you're toggling the layers back and forth and somebody could walk to a screen and say, this is what we're talking about and this is what we're talking about?
Yeah,
And video it so we could, have it for residents to look at and consider.
Are we allowed to take a field trip that way? Are we allowed to hold a meeting?
we could probably bring it here.
Yeah.
Okay,
We could probably do it right here.
okay.
I will, I'll just say that I'm a GIS wonk, so, I'm more than happy to help, set something up like that in ArcGIS so we can do that here from our computers.
Okay.
The only,
And it can be an interactive map. So,
That's what I'm talking
yeah,
about, something
it
that
can be an
we're,
interactive map where
Yeah.
you can turn the layers on, turn the aerial on and off.
and somebody can walk up and point.
Yep.
I'm a simple person, I like pointing.
on the printed maps, can you do a little more obvious outlines of the overlay districts? Because they're kind of hard to follow, especially at 6 Mile, I can't quite make it out. I've studied the territorial a lot, so I have a better idea, but it's hard to see on your page 6, for instance, the zoning map.
So,
That'd be great.
So bringing that up, I was going to wait till, but I had a discussion before the meeting started with Mr. Jackson about the overlay districts in the underlying zoning and how confusing that is for people. And, even for us that look at this stuff, it's like, you have this underlying zoning and then you've got something else. So some of the uses are allowed, some of them aren't allowed. You put this layer on, now some of it's allowed, not allowed with, conditions. It's very confusing. And I think we should seriously look at seeing, do we need these overlay districts? Does it make it more confusing for people? Should we get rid of the overlay districts and just, alter the underlying zoning so that the things that the overlay district is going to allow is allowed, so that makes it a cleaner way for people to look at, and especially anybody that wants to develop or put something in. It's like, here's the map and this is what it is. But, now it's like, here's the map's what it is. Now you've got this other thing. It's like, here's some more stuff that you need to look at. I think it's just confusing.
And,
Yep, go ahead.
and I was just going to say to address the chairman's point on that a big part, again, kind of bringing up that relationship between this map and the zoning ordinance, is that when you are rezoning a property or petitioning for a rezoning, one of the chief conditions is that the rezoning has to meet the associated future land use classification. It has to meet what's set out in the master plan and is meeting the spirit of intent of that. Those are regulations that are kind of set between both the Planning Enabling Act and the Zoning Enabling Act. It can be a legal challenge because if someone tries to make a rezoning that's outside of or deviates from what's in the future land use map, someone could argue that that's spot zoning and it can invalidate the rezoning. What a overlay district does is that it offers a little bit more flexibility because it's not fundamentally changing the district and in that relationship between both maps, but is allowing you to impose conditions. Usually that's for things like setbacks. It can be for design. It can be things for how you want to change things, something like a downtown area, or in this case, something like the Whitmore Lake North Territorial Overlay District that gives more flexibility for things that allow for mixed-use type developments. That is the purpose of an overlay, but we can certainly work with how to strengthen that relationship and up to the Planning Commission's discretion to kind of work on maybe reducing less of the confusion on how those are applied or what is allowed within those zoning districts.
So I know for me, with one person being on here, is that I want to make, when we get done with this, I want our master plan to be legally defensible without any question. And I think the overlay districts allow for too much, I don't see how they fit together. Because if we're setting up a plan for development, now all of a sudden we've got these overlays that we also have on the books someplace that are contradicting to our master plan, and where does that all end up falling into play? I think we need to get it so it's easily clarifiable, and that our zoning supports our master plan, so therefore there's no wiggle room, and it's legally defensible. That's ultimately what I want to get to.
Can you go to the general commercial?
Yeah.
So The, let's see. Oops. Yeah. So again, this is an area where there's a disconnect between the master plan, the future land use plan, and the zoning. You've got a large area shown on the future land use map as mixed use. And within that mixed use area, you've got multiple zoning districts. So trying to, and this is what I was talking about earlier, about predictability. Someone could develop something in their zoning district, their current zoning district, that's in the mixed use area that is inconsistent with your future land use plan, right? And we're kind of seeing it even with the relationship between your existing industrial district and your mixed use district and the overlay district, right? You're seeing sort of an incompatibility of permitted land uses. These land uses are permitted, and yet they don't fit together. So one of the things that we're going to try to do is say, you know, if this happens, then this is how it impacts the development of the adjacent property in terms of roadway connections between uses, landscaping between uses, all those things that dictate how uses work together. What we do not want to do, what I would caution the township against, is looking at it where each individual parcel develops individually. Because if you do it that way, you're going to have a hodgepodge of isolated, unrelated developments with a hodgepodge of uses that don't complement each other, but were just the best thing at the time. A drive-through next to a daycare facility. You know, both permitted uses in the same district, but very, you know, not really synergistic or not really compatible. So we're going to look at ways to sort of go beyond. You can pick any one of these 300 land uses and develop it on your property and say, here's how it should look, and still allow flexibility. So, you know, there's got to be connections between the uses, limited access to North Territorial and Whitmore Lake, internal circulation. So that means the uses have to be, sort of anticipate future development.
So for me, flexibility, that term tells me that there's a space in between there that's gray. And yeah, well, I'm just saying, from you, when you use that term, I'm looking at flexibility, there's a gray space in there. And I don't want any gray spaces.
No gray space.
That's why I'm like, the underlying zoning should have its flexibility within the underlying zoning without anything else layered on top of it that confuses that. And that's where I think that we want to try and get to. I think that will give the most clear-cut pathway forward for somebody looking at it going, here's what it is, and I know what's going on with it.
I understand exactly what you're saying, but it's going to be a more clearly defined, if you do this, then you have to do this in terms of the development standards to make sure that whatever you're doing is going to fit in with future development. So it's not, so in other words, as an example, you could do a large retail use, right, in the mixed-use area, right? But if you do that mixed-use development, a large retailer, you have to landscape the frontage according to a prescribed standard. You have to provide access to adjacent parcels to allow interconnections and that sort of thing. If you could also do a mixed-use development on that same piece of property, right, instead of a big box retailer. If you do a mixed-use development, you have to do the same kind of frontage development, so it looks the same from the road. You have to provide, also provide interconnection as well, but there'd be additional development standards in place. So the flexibility comes in, you could do either one of these uses, the large retailer or the mixed-use development. But either way, you know what you're going to get when it's done.
I had a question for you on that note. Like at the North Territorial 23 interchange, we've just gotten through discussing a small subdivision with one retail. At an interchange, my opinion at least, what I would think is that there should be more commercial and leave the residential further out. But has anybody gone through all these larger parcels that I keep hearing that, oh, across the street, that's a mixed use or a retail development? Somewhere these all have to be cohesive and set up. I mean, it's no different than a shopping mall or an airport. When we put in concessions, we know where we want to have the variety. We know where the bulk of the pedestrian traffic is, and then you slowly move out. I don't see that. I don't see that documented anywhere.
It's not in the current plan, and so you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The land use designations have to reflect actual development scenarios, right? You have these huge mixed-use parcels designated, these large mixed-use areas, but they don't reflect how development actually happens, you know, and it especially doesn't reflect the way you want it to happen. You know, so in some ways, you're forcing development to occur in a way that you don't want it to happen.
Just like you said, is the flexibility, that leaves too much.
So, again, the mixed use, you just brought this up as a perfect example, is that, you know, we don't have one idea of what a mixed use is. You can do this, you can do that, you can do that. We have these overlay districts, now it allows more flexibility. I don't like that. I want to get rid of all of that, because that's too much.
Be more specific.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So, all right, so we're all on the same page. We're talking, I don't want to talk around circles, but we're talking the same thing.
Oh, and something I want to say about these future land use classifications too is that this is currently based on the 2019 master plan. We can change these districts if we need to better reflect what the township wants to do. So, you know, you'll see, and, you know, I can kind of share throughout these slides, is that there are currently 3 separate mixed use classifications, and a lot of it is kind of factoring in what you're saying, where this mixed use is looking at, you know, the US 23 North Territorial area, where you have the overlay over these large lot general commercial parcels. And so that was where the idea came for something like the Groves, where you do have, you know, that multifamily in the back, but then you have commercial on the road frontage, and how Robertson is similar as an approach to mixed use, because I think the traditional understanding of mixed use is ground floor retail with residential on top. And I've seen that in places before on like a lower density scale. I remember I was driving through Hamilton, Ontario a few years ago and saw that, and it looks different, but like this is more about that kind of, that's what it is in that area. But then you also have the, you know, where you have the village center and cottage retail areas. That's around Whitmore Lake. That's a lot denser. So that is where you're going to see more of that traditional, you know, ground floor retail or live work type arrangements. And again, that's something that can be changed depending on what works best. So it doesn't have to be, it doesn't need to be that mixed use classification necessarily around the area if that's something that the township doesn't want. We're just basing that off of what we have in the master plan currently.
I think you're getting some direction from us on what we're looking for. And I think that, you know, the other thing we need to do is get you, while you're doing this, is look at our zoning ordinances and see if some of them need to be changed, so that as we're moving along in the master plan, you're recognizing the issues that we need to address to our zoning ordinances that need to marry up to what we're trying to get to. I think that's what you're planning on doing, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly, yeah. No, no. Scooch down to the, let me go down. Is this? Yeah, so this is a list of the land uses that are in the zoning ordinance that would be appropriate in your, you know, based on the future land use plan. And you can see and this isn't even all of them. You know, these are the permitted in the existing land uses. So the only thing that is going to allow these uses to be compatible is sort of a unifying development pattern. the buildings address the street in a consistent way. The access points are handled in a consistent way. The landscaping's handled in a consistent way. That's what's going to create a unified, predictable way, even though the uses may come and go, right? You don't want to back yourself into a situation where you have a highly specific building development that becomes obsolete and then becomes a major, liability. So you need to develop a program where these uses can sort of come and go based on market trends, but the ultimate development pattern is consistent. The buildings are consistent in terms of their location. The landscaping's consistent, and so it runs itself once you get those buildings put into place.
Right, and that's where you have the word in your zoning ordinance that says compatible. So when somebody comes in with
No,
something.
we're not
no,
going to use the word compatible
That's going away?
because that's way too gray. What the heck does compatible mean? It means, what we're going to say in the zoning ordinance is, you need to put your buildings in this location with a sidewalk in front, with landscaping in this location, according to this, landscape development, palette or design. So that way it's consistent. You know that when you drive down North Territorial or Whitmore Lake, it's a naturalized rural streetscape environment as you're going down there, right? And so the buildings, you don't have curb cuts every 50 feet or whatever. You have sort of predictable intersections with that road that take you into the internal road network that connect all these uses in a predictable way. So if I turn in here, I can get there.
We just need to be stronger at the interchange of where the US 23 is. If you keep saying that you could do multi-use, you're going to get so much residential. That's where retail belongs, not residential. Keep it confined, but I just don't see that. I see one little residential or one little retail, and the whole thing is residential. I mean, it's just, we just have to be a little bit more specific, I think, in the percentages of what's commercial, what's, office, retail.
One other thing, that's a great point, and I get it. The other thing that I said earlier at our last meeting that we want to do is look at what the market demand is. Do you want to have retail? And again, we want the downtown to thrive, right? We want to drive as much demand and make sure that that area is healthy and thriving and that sort of thing. So we need to make sure that area has all the infrastructure it needs to.
Absolutely.
And, that's got challenges. So that's our number one priority. Then, based on the population and the population projections of the community, what additional services are you going to need? Do you need a Myers? You can't support a Myers with Northfield's population, right? You can't. So that means you're going to be bringing people in, to Northfield to go to Myers, if you get a Myers there. Is that what you want? We're going to ask those questions. But you say that, but you probably want people coming from out of town, coming into Northfield to go to the restaurants in downtown. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. So you're going to have to make those kind of decisions strategically. Maybe you don't want large box retail here in Northfield. Maybe you don't want to be the retail provider for the region.
It's not a question of whether what we want or what we don't want. It's what the market is going to insist on versus what I'm interested in is making an informed choice about what we want. Okay, we can say we don't want big box retail. What we really might be saying is we don't like the way it looks, or we don't like the fact that it's going to bring more traffic, or but if we reject something like that, what are we rejecting? We're rejecting the idea that we might bring more traffic in, and it might support local businesses. You're saying that the interchange is appropriate for retail.
For small, for the sporadic ones,
I want to move up a level and examine that assumption. Are we assuming that because that's what every other interchange looks like? Or are we, is there a market for retail there? And if there isn't, will there be a market for retail there? I would encourage us to take one or two steps up higher level first before we start talking about, and it's great to get into the minutia about design standards, because ultimately that's where we're going to end up at the micro level. But if we don't ask the macro level questions first, we're not doing this right. So that's kind of the point I wanted to make. The other point I wanted to make is a smaller one. I'm sympathetic to the idea of considering doing away with or modifying, certainly tightening the idea of these overlay districts. But we can't do that without alerting the board that we're doing that, because the board carved out those districts.
Well, this is obviously just a discussion here, but if we're...
I'm just saying
Yeah,
that-
we're working towards this on the master plan. They're going to have to know that this is what it is we're doing. So there's going to have to be that communication to the board, for sure.
Right, we have a lot of leeway, but if we brought something to them and said, hey, we just did away with a whole bunch of overlay districts that you guys passed several years ago, they might react well to it. They might say, hey, good job, that's wonderful, that's exactly what we wanted you to do. But we have to give them the notice that that's a direction that we're considering going down.
Ultimately, they have to approve our master plan. So, I mean...
I get it, but I don't even want to devote the effort to eliminating overlay districts if the board says, the minute they get it, they say, what did you do? Why did you spend all this time eliminating these districts that are by ordinance?
Well, that's why we had to have Janet, so she can end up bringing that stuff forward to them and let them know. I had a point, and I can't...
On Tracy's point, though, in terms of the downtown, yes, that's a huge point. We haven't been able to come up with anything solid yet to make the downtown prosperous. It's gone, I mean, when I was a kid, it was the hot place to go. Now it's not. So we have to figure that out first. I know you can zone it, you can map it out all you want, but if we don't get it booming, then we can start spreading out the commercial aspect of it from there. But I don't see it yet.
Oh, what I wanted to say is that the whole thing we're talking about using mixed use for its intended purpose, or what we eventually decide is its intended purpose. I made mention when the Groves were here that I really wasn't in favor of putting apartments in that area. And the reason that I voted for that is because our master plan said that's where it is, that we have said as a community that we wanted to have stuff like that go. Now, in redoing our master plan, if we decide that that maybe isn't the best fit for that, then we can address that and eliminate the things that we decide to go into those spaces. And as Tracy was mentioning, we need to consider all of these things when we're talking about it as a macro level, so that we're not excluding something just because we don't like it. So, Mr. Gordon?
I as long as we're talking about the macro level, I think a lot of times what happens is, at least in this township in the last 40 years that I've been paying attention, the board is trying to do something that's really not its purview. I mean, they're not, the government, small government's not supposed to determine what the market is. The market determines what goes there. If we say we want to have a bunch of stores down here, but that's not what's happening because Amazon exists and stores are going away, well, it's really not our expertise. So I'm trying to figure out, how do you zone for growth in an area and still be flexible enough, because it's the market that's going to decide what goes where, and I don't know how we can do that other than try to just kind of give some general direction.
Right. So, the downtown is sort of a different challenge, right? But, I think there's enough evidence that shows that downtowns like that can be uniquely successful and don't compete necessarily with Amazon. They're not going to be the retail center, right? They're not going to be the retail magnet. It's going to be more of a social gathering spot, a place where you go out to eat and you have other experiences there. And yours is close to the water, so you really have some opportunity, which you guys have heard this for decades, right? So what's the holdup? I don't know. We'll have to look into it and figure that out.
The holdup is that it's between the lake and the expressway, and the buildings that are there are, some of them are residential, some of the buildings are 100 years old, they're not refurbishable easily unless you have a lot of money, and, the marijuana dispensary showed that you can do that. But the average person coming in to start a business is not going to take one of those buildings and refurbish that, and that's the reality of it. So what else can we do? We approved the fire hall as apartments, which whether or not that comes to fruition, I don't know, but was that the best place to put an apartment? I mean, and it's like, so these are the issues that we have in that area, that most of us that have lived here for a long time, we see it. It's like, well, how do you do this and try and put development or who's going to invest that kind of money to put up a building in as a restaurant or something? And we haven't found that.
So there's a gap. There's a gap between what the market is willing to do in the downtown and what you guys want to see. So you got to bridge that gap. You got to fill in that gap, and you do that by working with MEDC. You work with other partners that can bring the gap financing to the table and bridge that gap. MEDC, Michigan Economic Development Corporation. You get yourself in line for grants that can help pay for infrastructure improvements in the downtown that you guys can't pay for, but are necessary for restaurants to be successful.
But we just took a big chunk of property and turned it into a park.
Yep.
So now that's off the table. And so I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying if that's what we wanted to have developed, we just took a big chunk and turned it into something that's not going to be developed. So, I mean, it's a very unique problem. I said it's been something we've been discussing as long as I've been involved with this stuff. And that's almost 20 years, just like Mr. Gordon. But anyways, I don't want to keep going off. We can go off on a tangent here. So let's finish our presentation so you guys can get out of here. We can too.
Right. Well, and that's why we're here. And I just wanted to just kind of build off what John was saying, that, as we're putting this plan together and updating it, zoning alone isn't going to be the only part of it. It also, because, looking at economic development, looking at what MEDC can do, what grants are there for facade improvement programs and supporting other things. For that, we'll kind of build off of zoning, which also allows other uses to come in to kind of help with building tax revenue and bring people in. So all those things are going to kind of work together. I was just going to kind of go through these really quickly, beyond what we already talked about, but and we're also going to share these, but generally these are, again, these are very rough forecasts to kind of say that each use could potentially generate X number of people, whether that's residents, whether that's employees, and what the impact is going to be in terms of REUs of sewage output, which again, some of it is estimated, some of it comes from what Tetra Tech has already done. But also looking at what would be required for parks to make sure that, based on the information that's put together from organizations like NERPA or what information is available from DNR and, Washtenaw County Parks to see, what is necessary or at least a boon for the residents to kind of meet the recreation needs. And that's going to vary based on use, but, the uses are kind of also spread across the township, so that's going to look different in different places. And this is particularly focusing on the areas that are within the sewer district where there is higher density and where there are going to be different needs as opposed to what's out in the ag areas, which can also add parkland, which can also add recreation or conservation area that kind of hits those targets as well. So with that too, you're also looking at what you can do with existing districts and how that can be changed. For example, with manufactured homes, that doesn't have to be a community of single or double wides. That also includes things like tiny homes. That includes, modular construction. And then mixed use, again, there are these different classifications that are out there, but we can tweak those and we can look at kind of some of the different options there. So it doesn't have to be this large lot mixed use if that's not conducive to what the township wants, but it can also be there and it can kind of build off of other mixed use options or things that are kind of more, again, form-based and kind of built on the appearance with it, kind of maintain a consistent aesthetic and an access profile in the Whitmore Lake area and off 23 and North Territorial. So, just trying to factor in what are the impacts going to be and what are going to be the most appropriate uses. Should it be more residential? Should it be more retail? Should it be more office? And that's going to be based on where it is relative to the lakefront, where it is relative to, that new park and kind of where all the things fit. We're essentially putting this together to say, this is what we're looking at now, and we want to, we're going to be working with you to figure out what is going to be the best fit and how we reclassify these areas. And so, that can be, again, residential over commercial. That can be kind of some of these smaller office uses, things like kind of those newer, what we call missing middle housing types, like cottage courts in the denser areas or live-work arrangements or, kind of figuring out where the best fit is based on, where it's necessary to have, kind of make sure everyone's needs are being met, whether that is higher density residential in the most appropriate places while maintaining that single-family residential character throughout most of the township as well. And then also for your more intense uses like commercial and industrial, which generally all of them are within the sewer district. So it's just a matter of looking at what's there now and again, looking at where the market's at as far as who's going to be most likely to site and grow within the township, within those districts and how zoning can support it, but what are the other programs like incentives or grants that can kind of be used to grow and retain businesses that kind of best meet both the needs and the character of the township. So the last thing I'll add on to that is, and again, looking at that development piece, for this plan, we can work on putting together development scenarios. And scenario planning is essentially looking at a given property or series of properties and kind of seeing what could go there and what's the impact of something that goes in there. So for example, there's this property right here that's currently vacant. It's between, the Groves is this kind of L-shaped property on the east side of it, and then on the west side of it's that subway that's off of US 23. That could be more housing like the Groves. It could be, something like a self-storage facility or something that's more for like large-scale services. It could be big box retail if there is a demand or an interest in attracting people with something like a Meijer or a Menards or an Aldi or something. And so we can kind of compute different scenarios that look at what could go there and then how is that going to affect that property and then also the properties around it. And then I think that just takes us into zoning if you want to.
So, Mr. Thomas, I was thinking about this, is that to address your concern that we're going to start moving forward in a direction that the township board may not particularly care for. I think once we get to a point we get some ideas for this stuff, we should probably end up having a joint meeting with them to where perhaps the presentation could be made so that they could see where we're heading, why, and have some input into that before we get past a certain stage. I think that may end up being the best way to address that.
I think that's a great idea, and I would encourage that wholeheartedly. Just the master plan process in general, once the planning commission has an acceptable version, then they would recommend it to the township board for distribution to the surrounding communities. So that would be another opportunity for you guys to give the township board a draft of what you're thinking for them to react and respond to it before it gets distributed.
I think he was talking about before we even get to the end product like that, is to have some input into that.
It's been my experience that if you give the board a finished product, what the input that you'll get back is detailed, but it's tweaks and revisions of smaller points. Nobody on the board will think to ask the larger questions because they will assume that we've already asked them. and it might not cross their mind. They've got a lot to do, and I was on that board, and a lot of times it's just, okay, I got my packet, I'm going to get into the weeds, I'm going to get into the minutia. I'm not even thinking about the bigger stuff or the policy stuff, which is important.
And that's why I say an example, if for some reason that we get to the point where we say we want to get rid of these overlay districts, just for an example, is that having a joint meeting and say, here's why it is we want to get rid of them, rather than just saying, here's our end product, we're just going to get rid of them. And they won't know why, because they weren't involved in any of that process. Just so that, because that will have to come from, they'll have to approve those types of changes down the road too. And so they can see where our thought process is before we get to a final product. And that way, they're not getting it and then shoving it back to us and saying, we don't like this part of it, we redo that, or we don't understand it.
I think it's great to get a joint meeting at the beginning so we can all sort of say, here's where we see this going, and voice our collective concerns and issues. So the issue about overlays can come up and be discussed. The board will have issues that you're not even thinking of. They can bring those up so that you can look at those as the project unfolds, for sure. I would say let's get it on the books sooner rather than later.
I was thinking there's a possibility, another way, before getting into the joint meeting, if you could put together a memo from this meeting, for instance, and say, am I correct in my understanding that this is what the Planning Commission is telling me they want to see, and the various points? We would look at it. If it's in fact, we're on the same page, we could send that along to the board simply as a report to the board and say, take a look at this. Don't let us go down some avenue that you have a problem with and spend any more time or your time on it if it's not going to meet muster with the people that are at the board level. What do you think of that?
Well, part of the thing is that the board doesn't have any responsibility for doing this. This is our responsibility. So therefore, rather than having them have say-so over what we're going to do, is that we should come up with the ideas and present it to the board so that they understand where we're going, so that if they have any concerns about that, we can address it there. I don't think we're there yet.
Has there ever been a working session where, like, I guess that's how I'm used to working, is, put out the drawings, that, we kind of play around with the sketches and the onion skin overlays, and,
Yep.
I mean, that's.
Well, see, normally in a full redo, it's a big process to do it, which we're trying to avoid getting in and
We
taking
don't want to
apart.
start all over, no.
We're not trying to take the whole
No.
thing apart. We're trying to fix the things
Just
that,
talking about the specifics, what we were talking about earlier is being a little bit more specific with each of the areas, and maybe that's where we do, stretch out the onion skin and say, okay, this is where we'd like to concentrate on this, let's do this.
That would be awesome.
I mean,
but I think we need to have the ideas that we really want. We have a lot of discussions, great ideas, but I think we need to get a consensus on what we're trying to get to,
Exactly, yeah.
and then have the board meeting. So then you can end up, you can be there, you can present why it is we're doing these things like this, and then we can have that input.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Yep. So we'll develop the next couple of steps and send those to you so you can see how this process is going to continue from here.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Gordon.
So you had started this discussion with saying, you would like to know what we would like to see.
Yep.
Can we send you our ideas?
Yeah?
Good.
Well, send them to me, I'll send them off to them, that way they're only getting it from me, so that way.
Okay.
And then Julie can end up being, CC'd on it too, so everybody
All right.
sees that.
Great. You had mentioned that you want to talk about the concept of, when you have a residential development, the impacts of that. For instance, on taxes and services, are the taxes, covering the services? I know that 20 years ago, the figure was a single-family home had to be worth $350,000 before it paid enough taxes to cover the services that it requires in that family. Do you have any idea what that number is today?
No, and obviously it's different in different types of communities, so I don't know if we have the budget to do a full cost of service analysis, but we're going to try to quantify it in some ways. We've already started looking at, the the value per acre, you know, the equalized value per acre for the different land uses, so you can see the drastic difference between how little a Myers generates per acre compared to what a downtown mixed-use project generates per acre. You know, it's a huge difference. You know, it's much higher on a per acre basis for that downtown redevelopment. So we're going to give that to you to take a look at as part of this quantitative ongoing tabulation of each of the land uses. And so ultimately, at the end, when we come up with a land use scenario, we'll have a cumulative total that says this scenario is going to generate this amount of tax revenue if it comes to fruition. It's going to generate this amount of traffic generation if it comes to fruition. So it's going to be basically a build-out analysis.
Great. I'd be interested in seeing the difference between the cost-benefit analysis on an apartment complex versus a home. Because homes change hands, for instance, every 10 years on average. Apartment complexes don't change that frequently, so a house value is capped in terms of the taxes that it's charged. The assessed valuation goes up, but once it gets sold for a lot more money, all of a sudden the tax collection is much higher. That happens every 10 years with a house, much longer with apartment buildings. So maybe apartments aren't the best financial deal for a community that's trying to keep a cap on its tax base, you know, tax revenue.
Apartments, if they're rental, are commercial uses. Their tax is commercial.
Yeah.
So it's not capped like residential are.
Okay.
If they're condos and they're owner occupied, then they probably are capped. Right, but apartments are a commercial use.
Yeah, I'd still like to see, I know it's apples and oranges, but I'd like to see what the comparison would be, you know.
Apples and
Because
pineapples.
as you well know, the taxes is a big issue in the community, and
Sure.
we don't want to keep doing stuff that makes it higher. And obviously, light industrial and commercial more than pay for itself, and farming, for instance, than residential development.
So do you have what you need from us for this
We
night?
do, yes,
All right.
thank you.
So we could talk all night about this. We got
could.
some other business here to take care of too, so.
So after all that, you're actually claiming that you have what you need?
For now.
Okay.
I'll need
You're
more
be- You're
later.
better than I am.
I'll need more later.
Yeah. All right, so so that we can end up just having this discussion about the wastewater treatment plant and the 2015 evaluation that we have here. Mr. Rubel just wanted to have some questions that we would have so he could be prepared to answer them, and so he's not caught off guard. So I had a few comments and questions based upon this report, so I don't know if anybody else does. All right. So I don't know if you want to copy those down or,
Can we hit the,
oh. How do you turn that off?
just hit the button again? Might take a second.
No, that's not it.
You should just hit the click share.
I just didn't, it did not, it's still green. Display off? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so, Mr. Gordon, do you want to start off and give just some questions? Obviously, there's not going to be any answers, so just, state the questions you'd like to have Mr. Rupel discuss when he comes there on the 16th.
Okay, well, can we start with the report just on page 1, under the analysis? They talk about this info SWMM software and that there were certain assumptions that they operated on. I'm just kind of curious what those assumptions would be that when they put in all this data, what were the assumptions? I don't know if it makes any sense, if what they'll tell us will be helpful, but I know that a lot of times the product that you get out is a function of what you put in. So I'm curious what those assumptions are. There's a sentence there that says there are approximately 100 REUs connected to the North Territorial area not associated with the developments. I'm curious if that's the ones at the park, because later on in the report, there's something about 100 RUs at the waterfront park. So I'd like that clarified. And also on page 1, the table, I thought these numbers are slightly different. I thought the Chestnut number initially was 270. I thought Robertson Brothers was 165. If they're 211 now, I'm unaware of that.
Hold on, what are you looking at?
This report here.
Okay, I was doing the 2015 one. I didn't know
Oh, you were
were-
talking about
Yeah,
the capacity report?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Start over. I have fewer on page 11. I pretty much jumped to the conclusions. On page 11, there, under growth policy, there's a statement in there that I thought is important, and this actually dealt with something Mr. Jackson had to say, or maybe it was Mr. Gronow, but in terms of the responsibility of SADs and what a commitment the township has to them. And it just says right here under the growth policy, quote, "The property owners are paying an assessment for the construction of the sewers." So I would assume that they're paying a bill every month to pay for the sewers that were put in along their property. They haven't plugged into them possibly yet, but if in fact they are paying for the construction of the sewers, then I would assume that we should honor that commitment and hold aside our use for those people and for those properties. That's just my opinion. That's page 11. At the top of page 12, the paragraph was very interesting. There was the conservative policy decision was regarding Green Oak Township and the commitment there. But what he called an alternate policy would be that since Green Oak hasn't done anything there in the last 10 years, that they can pretty much ignore it. And I looked at the contract. It looks like the contract expired November 17th of last year. It was a 20-year contract. At least that's what the documentation showed. Now, I'm not an attorney, so I don't know if in fact it's dead, but that's what the term limit was for that contract in the document. Personally, I think it'd be, if it's not a commitment anymore, then it's not a commitment, then their conservative versus alternate policy don't really have anything to do. There's nothing more to be described there. I was kind of shocked looking under 8.0 project funding when they talked about doing studies. Beyond this study of the sewer system was going to cost between $300,000 and $500,000. I don't quite understand how we could possibly get $300,000 worth of information that we don't already have. I would be in favor of asking the superintendent of the wastewater treatment plant what the capacity there is, and then we would know.
I think that study that you're referring to was the study that they said that had to do with the influx into the lines. And that's what they were looking at. If they needed to do it more in-depth about the influx into the lines, that's what it was going to cost.
Right. Okay.
However, that is a good question, is that how does the influx into the line affect the amount of REUs that are going to be available within the whole sewer treatment facility, the whole, everything? Because if there's obviously influx, how does that change the dynamics? And how does that affect what we potentially should be looking at for development in these areas? Knowing that there's influx going on, is there a percentage that we need to accommodate for that? You know, because you start pushing up into these hard limits, and then you have a percentage of influx that pushes you way over that. And we don't want to get to that point.
Right.
Before there's something that needs to happen. So the question I think maybe you're looking for is, they don't have the study done on how much influx, but they know it happens. How does that affect our future planning for the treatment plant? And we need to know that for our master plan.
I would think there'd probably be an industry standard that they would use.
I don't know, that's a question we need to find out.
Yeah.
So like I said, we're just trying to find his questions,
Yeah.
to give to him.
Yeah. By my reading of the summary, 9.1 at the bottom of page 12, it seems like he said they were between 800 and 1,500 REUs, and we got over 1,000 of them going into territorial right with the 4 projects that are being talked about right there. I don't know if this 800 to 1,500 it's pre that development, so
They're talking, remember, this is 2015.
2015.
So this was trying to get the tank put in place.
Yes.
And so that's where those numbers come into play. If you read that again, it's like, it says that, I think it's 1,500 with the tank in place, which that has been put in.
Yeah, but it
But
says,
those are, we need to get that clarified.
yeah, the tank was never designed to improve, to add to the REUs. That was really clear at the time that the millions of dollars were borrowed to build it. It was being done not to increase capacity at the plant, but to deal with overflow during high rain events so that there was no pollution downstream.
Well, it seems to be that that's not the case, at least from his, it seemed like they were including that into plant capacity. Again, that's a question, that's a good question to ask them.
Yeah, and I know that they're putting $7 million into the current redo of the lines in town, which should reduce the infiltration. I would hope that they'd be able to tell that after they put the new lines in, because there'd probably be the same number of homes feeding into the system, and they should be getting fewer gallons out of that into the wastewater treatment plant. But this conclusion says that if they hit 800 REUs, this is in 2015, that would pretty much be the typical, quote, typical threshold for the MDEQ or the now EGLE to think that we should expand the wastewater treatment plant. So to me, that means if they said 800 then, and we're talking about 1,000 REUs at territorial, we are now maxed out at the wastewater treatment plant.
Well,
Are we or aren't we? That's the question.
right. I mean, using his calculations from 2015, that number is around 1,500. But then you end up increasing, again, it's the amount of influx. What's the percentage? Because then it does put you up to that number. So those are the questions we need to ask.
And 1,500 would be the absolute max to put us at the 1.3 million gallons on, high water events. But this is, 800 is the break point for starting to think about spending tens of millions for expansion of the sewage wastewater treatment plant. So those are the questions I had on this capacity study, capacity report.
All right, so the questions that I had written down is, the contracts with Green Oaks, are they expired? All right, so you brought that up. We need to know, are they really expired? If that's the case, then we don't have to hold that amount in reservoir. So that frees that amount up. Township's existing wastewater treatment plant has a natural pollution discharge elimination system, which is, and they list things down as, I think it's 1 million gallons per day. That's on page 1. So, when we're looking at this stuff, we're looking at REUs. They're listing things down as million gallons per day. They're two different metrics, and we need to talk the same language. So I don't want to try and sit down and convert everything. So I don't know what the plant capacity is in REUs, because that's what we need to know, since that's what we're doing every measurement from. Well, yeah, but I want them in order to provide that. So, we need, when they're talking about the plant capacity, I'd like to know it in REUs, since we're talking that language.
260 gallons for a household? I thought that was the,
I don't know. That's what it says, but
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what they're using. So the flow rates, I want to know how many REUs will developments contribute into during wet weather. Again, it has to do with influx. Because that number changes. Under the page 3, under the map, it has REUs, it's table 1, REUs average daily wastewater flow in the North Territorial Special Assessment District. So they had research, technology, and manufacturing, total acreage 323, ultimate REUs 809. This was obviously 2015, but I don't think that their metrics would change. I'd like to know where the Groves numbers place into that, and where does Chestnut place into that, the North Territorial SAD? Where is that coming out of? And so under, this is page 12, summary 2. It says the township has sufficient treatment capacity available to continue to accept new connections during average dry weather conditions. So this came into the same thing that you roll into. So my question was, why does a SAD have an obligation? So in the paperwork that I've seen, when the SADs were created, the resolution, all the discussions, township board discussions, township board notes, township manager's notes, I see where there is nothing in there saying that there is an obligation of REUs to a particular SAD. The costs for the SADs were just for the cost of running the lines down. There's nothing in any of those documents that shows that they have a special connection or special use that is always in perpetuity to them. Can't find it anyplace. There's nothing stating that.
that's interesting. I would think it's a question for the attorney.
I think that's where it's at.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, like, I can't find it. So my question is, why is there an obligation? We're talking about, a total capacity here, and everything needs to roll into it. Everything that we're talking about. And in reading through this summary, and I think eventually this is what I'm getting towards, this summary is fine for 2015, but it doesn't really give us in 2025 what the overall health of the wastewater treatment system is. We are getting hodgepodge. We're getting little snippets here and little snippets there. We don't have an overall view of what the township's wastewater treatment plant looks like. And I think we need that. And I think ultimately, when Mr. Rubel's done, that's going to be one of the things that I'm going to want to have, make a recommendation to the township board on, is that we need to have a overall view and study of the health of the wastewater treatment plant. We need to know its real capacities. We need to know all of these things, any saved things that now aren't saved. We need to know the line sizes. We need to know the capacity of the lines. We need to know all these things about how much effluent they can have, so that we know as we're moving forward, we all see a big snapshot of this and not see a hodgepodge. And I'm seeing this as a hodgepodge thing. I don't see a big overall view of it. So, I mean, those are the questions that we need to address and see if he can give us an answer. And if we can't get some of the answers to these questions, I think we need to make a recommendation to the township board that we need to have a full overview done so that we're seeing a complete picture of what we're talking about. But, Mr. Jackson, do you think that's something that should be done? So you get a complete picture also? Because right now, I don't think you have a complete picture.
I think these are good questions, and I think getting Brian here to answer these questions will determine sort of what the next steps are.
All right. Okay.
But we do need to know the answers because it impacts,
Everything.
the township's policy on how to pay for these improvements. I mean, there's going to be improvements that have to be made at some point in time, and so we need to know.
Yeah, because otherwise, right now, it's an unknown. Who's going to pay for the upgrades? And, you know, you can say that it's going to be this party or that party. There's no policy. It needs to be down in writing. Anyways, that's beyond our purview here. And then on page 13, it said, we recommend Northfield Township evaluate its system development charge. The charge that the tap fee is basically on what the township charges to help maintain the system. So my question is, it's going to be to Mr. Rubel, how much is it per tap fee? Is that sufficient to cover future improvements? And has it been changed?
I'd be curious to hear what he says about that.
And that's all my questions. Oh. Oh, yeah, we got on another page. This is the March 24th Tetra Tech. 2025, thank you, sorry. So my comments or questions, same as Mr. Gordon's in this. The 100 REUs connected in North Territorial, what are they? Well, where are they coming from? Because I don't know, it's not listed anyplace. I saw the number you put down on there, 1 REU equals 260 gallons per day. However, I don't want to have to sit down and do the calculation every time I'm doing that. It should end up being all in the same language. So instead of gallons per day, it should end up being in REUs, I think. So I'm just going to go through my questions. On page 2, which is the pipe sizing, I want to know that when he lists down the nominal capacity, is that the actual peak capacity of the lines?
Yeah, I don't know what those numbers mean in relation to anything.
And on table 4, pipe peak flows. I don't see any of those, well, a few of them. I don't see where all these pipes are. We only have a small snippet. Some of these aren't on there.
Oh, really? 638, 639.
Anyways, this is the small snippet I'm talking about. The lines extend beyond this little scope right here. And I know this was all it was looking at, but we don't have anything else to look at on the pipe sizes and the pumping station capacities. I don't know any of those things, and I can't find them anyplace. So I think that's why we need an overall view. And that's all I had. Gordon, do you want to add anything, or anybody else?
There's a term used on page 1 in the analysis called a peaking factor, P-E-A-K-I-N-G. Peaking factor of 4 was applied to all flows. I'm not quite sure what that means other than multiply times 4, and that's going to be what the peak is going to be. I'm not really sure. That would be clarified. It'd be helpful. On page 2, there's the map, and like you said, I'd like to see a bigger map so that it shows what's happening to the north and what's happening to the south. Is that line goes down. I was also kind of curious how the Chestnut extension that was put in, why did it jump across Territorial Road and go that way rather than being on their property and going across? Because I think it goes down Territorial to Whitmore Lake Road and then north and then jumps across 23. Doesn't make much sense to me. Table number 3 is REUs per acre, and then there's acres of future development. The total of those 3 is 1,165. Is that the number of acres we're talking about? Is that the number of rooftops we're talking about, or is it REUs? I'm not quite sure. And does it include the SAD south of North Territorial? And I guess the overall question is, this is more or less dealing with pipe size on this analysis. I'd like to have like what you're talking about, which is the analysis that says, and here's what the plant capacity is, because those two are obviously very tied together. That's all I have.
Bring your questions next time, don't throw those away. Mr. Thomas, anything?
We're talking about questions for Mr. Rubel, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Not really. I guess the only question I would have for him is, given that this is all estimates, there's some precision here, and I understand that there are industry standards. What's the plus or minus on if we're close to what what he would say is capacity? When does it? What's the plus or minus on when we could expect something catastrophically expensive to happen? Is it a 20% that we don't want to cross over into the red? Is it 30%? Is it 35%? Are we so trusting in the numbers that we could push up to 5% of close to capacity? I'd want to know an opinion on that. That's all.
That's the tipping point, and I think I haven't been able to find that answer anyplace, so that's a great question.
I thought the document said that the DEQ wanted you to start working on capacity expansion once you hit 85% of what you have as your capacity, or what you think your capacity is. But you're right, I mean, how accurate are the numbers that we're getting? What's the plus or minus? But 85 is you can't wait to 100% capacity before you start.
The more I've looked into this, the more questions I have than I do have answers. We're approving certain developments because we're being told that we have capacity, and I don't see that where those numbers are coming from because I can't find them, and I don't know if we have capacity. And I can't, that's why, this may be, I'm thinking we need a bigger study to show us exactly what we have if they don't have that available for us.
Yeah, maybe they can just take all the studies they've already done and put together a summary that gives us the answers we're looking for, I would hope.
Maybe, but I've asked, and I've been told there's no answers to those questions.
Well, it'll be good to have Brian here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyways, those are the questions, so. Anybody else? Have we beaten this enough? Yes.
I've asked for clarification. So at the last meeting, you did talk about asking Ms. Rubel to attend the 16th meeting. No motion was made at that time due to the fact you were going to discuss it at tonight's meeting. Did you want me to put forth that invitation?
Yes.
For the 16th?
Yes.
Okay.
He's aware that, because I've been in contact with him, he's aware that we were requesting this, and the one thing I told him is that we will try and supply him questions.
Okay.
So that he's not surprised.
That was my next question. If you do have a moment to put some of those questions in writing, you can send them on to me, and make sure that everybody gets a copy of those, as well as Mr. Rubel, so he has a chance to.
Yeah, so one of the things he did tell me that if the questions are so extensive that he doesn't have the answers, he might have to postpone the time he's going to come in. Just, hey,
But if we
just
put the
telling you.
questions to him, then he
Yeah.
will have
Yeah.
opportunity to look them over, that's all.
Can you request an opinion from the attorney regarding the Green Oak contract? And the SADs?
I think that, I think that township attorneys have the question about the SADs in front of them already.
Okay, there's a corollary to that that we probably need to think about is if we get an opinion from the attorney that says that there's no legal impediment to ignoring the Green Oak ones, if the attorney says that we don't owe Green Oak, then we don't owe Green Oak. I'm comfortable with that. But there's a kind of hidden policy question here on the SADs, which is if the attorney says there's no legal requirement to hold a certain number of REUs, it's still a policy question. Is it fair to allot a reasonable expectation of the property owners in that area would be that when it came time to build, that there would be REUs for them? They paid for the line.
So I'll tell you this, at the time that this was put in, there was a requirement that within so many days after being installed and ready to go, that they were required to tap into it if they were going
Right.
to. So I don't see that there's any language in there that if it's done afterwards that, because they didn't pay for any tap-in fees, so they only paid for the construction cost to put the lines down.
Okay?
So they didn't pay for any tap-in fees. If they did, I would expect that there would probably be some saved, capacity.
We need to have that policy discussion, though. And I'm not coming down one way or the other. But it's not just simply a matter of, hey, there's free numbers for new development if we can ignore these. And that may be where the conversation takes us, but not necessarily, that's all.
Yep, I understand. Okay. All right, thanks a lot. That was good discussion. All right, so we're going to move on to, do you need anything, Mr. Jackson? We're good? Okay. We're going to move on to new business. And this is case JPC 22009, approve or deny a request for an extension of a site plan approved on May 17, 2023. This is the second request for an extension for Stop and Store, which is at 8761 Main Street. So I don't know if we, Mr. Jackson, you don't need to say anything like this. Is this something that you need to do anything about? Okay. Does anybody have any discussion? I take it you are here for that, sir? Yes. Okay. Do you want to say anything? Just state your name and your address so for the record.
Tom Arlitzis, 8761 Main Street.
Okay.
I was hoping we'd be in construction mode by now and not have to come to you for another extension. But unfortunately, the economy has dealt us a blow the last year. And really, the delay has been, we had many vacancies. We've been there for 15 years. We always had a waiting list, and that gave demand for more storage. So for about 11 years, we were turning people away. So we started the process of this demand, and 2023, we got the approval. Unfortunately, the economy tanked, and we went from a waiting list, 24 to about 30 vacant and so on. Interest rates has shot up, construction costs had more than doubled, so we're gonna put a hold on that. This last winter was the worst. We had about 50 vacancies. The good news is, the last 3 months, we filled about 30. So things are starting to look up. And now we're getting a lot more phone calls on units and so on. So we only have 25 left. So I don't see why the next year we cannot go ahead with the construction that you've approved already.
Okay. Anybody want to ask any questions?
No,
All right. Oh, go ahead. Mr. Thomas, yes.
I was just going to make the motion, but go ahead.
I actually have it all written out.
Let it rip.
One of the comments I want to make, though, before I do this, is that in our ordinance, there's a maximum amount of days that pass the original site plan that is the maximum that we can end up granting the extension is 545 days. It's listed down in there specifically.
I can clarify that if you'd like. So it's 365 days to apply for permits. It's 545 days to begin construction, both of which the Planning Commission has the authority to grant extension on. So it's not a maximum. You do have the authority to grant the extension.
It says, approval shall expire and be of no effect 545 days following the date of approval of the Planning Commission, unless construction has begun and has diligently been pursued to completion, which that hasn't happened.
It has not happened. So it's 365 days. It becomes null and void if they have not applied for the permits. It's 545 days if they have not begun construction.
Right, so they have one that we get granted one extension of 365 days.
Correct.
So the maximum we can end up applying now is 180 days to meet that number.
That is not correct. You may extend for an additional year if you wish. If you do the math, the 545 days would have expired November of 2024. So that's just, they need to begin construction within 545 days unless the Planning Commission grants the extension. You have the authority to grant an additional extension.
No, I know that, but I'm looking at the dates, it's, the numbers down on there. We granted them an extension of 1 year already.
Correct.
365 days.
Correct?
It says approval shall expire and be of no effect 545 days following the date of approval of the Planning Commission, and unless construction is, it said the Planning Commission may extend the time limits upon showing good use, which we already did. So I'm reading it that we can't extend it past 545 days.
Expiration of this.
Mr. Thomas? Yeah.
If they do not apply for a permit, for building permits, then the expiration is with, 365 days. If they do not begin construction, it also expires at 545 days, both of which those dates can be extended by the Planning Commission.
So the 545 days limit is just getting pushed down the road too by the
Correct.
extension.
Yeah, your extension, by virtue of the fact
Mr.
that you're
Thomas?
granting the extension of the site plan for
You read that?
365 days, you are then granting the construction beginning an additional 6.
No hablo inglés. What language are you reading from?
It's on the page right here.
Which page?
Here. It was in our packet.
It was in the memo that I provided.
Okay, all right.
So I had a question for Julie.
It is. No effect.
Hey, Julie?
Pending following approval by the planning commission unless the building.
Julie, the last paragraph on your report says, the commission has the ability to extend the time limits. Consideration should be given to the precedent as well. Can you see some negative impacts of this precedent? Or, it seems like the man is making a,
Economy changes, we change our zoning ordinances, so the longer a period of time you extend it, you're risking, additions and changes to the ordinance would not be effective. So I think at some point, you need to put a limit on the amount of extension that you grant a site plan. And the second part of that is, in that ordinance, it does say for good cause. So it is up to this board to determine what that for good cause is in order to make that extension.
No permit has been applied for?
No permit has been applied for, correct. So that was my point in saying, you may extend it, but I would, A, limit it, and I would B, suggest that you determine this would be the final extension, so that a year from now, we're not doing another one, and a year after that, we're not doing another one. There should be an end to it. Otherwise, again, circumstances change, they can come back and reapply for a site plan again.
Thank you.
So you asked me to look at the ordinance language. I think the way that I would read that ordinance is that those time limits, the 365 and 545, they apply if he never came in and asked for an extension. So if it was just open-ended and he hadn't done any construction, or he hadn't pulled a permit, then we would be talking about an expiration. The fact that the second part of that is a separate sentence that says that the planning commission may extend the time limits upon a showing of good cause makes me think that we have the ability to extend that with good cause, yeah.
Time frame does everybody feel comfortable with extending that to?
I think once you extend the approval date, you likewise extend that 445 days.
Julie, what policy would be served by saying that this is the final extension?
To put a limit on it, so that we are not every year being revisited by a similar request.
What could that hurt?
Again, circumstances change, John, if you,
Yeah, we're right now going through a master plan process that's going to result in ordinance amendments. One of the ordinance amendments may be that you have to put a certain type of landscaping in front of your business, that he would be
Grandfathered in, so to speak, yep.
apply for a new site plan.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense to me.
we just adopted new architectural standards. I'm not saying that he doesn't meet those standards.
Right.
But again, that is something else that we're going to implement.
Perfect explanation. I
On
got
new
it.
site plans, he would be exempt from those new standards.
So one more year, and with the understanding that this is the last extension?
You can grant up to an additional year if you choose. My suggestion was less than a year.
Oh,
When we started this project, the facility was able to pay for it even if not one tenant moved in.
right.
It went from 1.2 million project to almost 3 million within 2 years.
Wow.
Between the interest rates and the extra costs. So that facility cannot afford that type of mortgage with the existing mortgage.
Sure.
It's a small family business. We don't have the backup to be able to afford $30,000 a month mortgage. So we had to hold back. It was a 2-year process to get the whole approval, and the school was good enough to sell us some land so we can do this construction. So things are looking better. Prices are coming down, interest rates are coming down, and we put way too much time and energy into this to just walk away. So that's why I'm coming for extension, because we don't want to get overextended. And all of us, we have homes and mortgages, we know what it's like. And when credit cards and so on pile up, and then when you have financial, and then things go downhill and you don't have money to pay for that mortgage, it's one thing having a $1,000 or $2,000 mortgage, but having a $30,000 mortgage, it's something that'll give you a heart attack. So we had to pull back for that. So we hope that this year is a better year. It looks like it will. And we can go on with the process and take care of this construction.
So one of the things that I totally understand it, and I know things changed and, you know, circumstances changed. Have you considered to do your project in phases rather than all at one time to eliminate this cost burden upon you? And
And the other thing is, if a year comes up and we still are in the same boat, then we'll make the building smaller. Right now, it's a 32,000 square foot, two-story. So if that's the case, then we'll go with a one-story building.
all right,
So this is still gonna happen, and if we can't put up this particular building, then we'll come in front of you and say, okay, we got a smaller one, let's see if we can approve this.
okay.
And we can get it.
That's all I was saying, is like, because if you keep extending it, but, you know, the circumstances don't change, either you're not going to ever do it, or you have to change it and modify what your plan is to do it, do what you want, something
Let's put it
differently.
this way, next year, if it still didn't happen, then we're gonna make it
Okay.
smaller.
Fair enough.
See, I'm curious, sir, when you do this expansion, are you going to do any more landscaping of the property?
Yes, there's phases 1 and 2, and all of that has been, yes.
So there's going to be more plantings
Oh,
and
yeah. Oh,
landscaping?
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so I'll make the motion to extend the final site plan for JPC 22009 Stop and Store at 8761 Main Street, which is parcel B0208250022, for an additional 365 days, and this being the maximum extension total by Northfield Township zoning ordinance 36-866C3, with the expiration of May 17th, 2026, and to include all the conditions listed on the original site plans. Notation that there will be no further extensions allowed on this site plan. Okay, motion by Stan Alacho, support by Mr. Thomas. Is there any discussion? All right, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Ms. Matthews, did you? Okay, all right, I didn't hear that. Okay. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. You have your extension, sir. All right. I'm going to make a motion to approve the preceding minutes of March 19th, 2025, as presented, unless there's corrections. Yes, Mr.
I just
Gordon.
got one correction on page 3.
Okay.
Regarding the he noted once the residential projects under review are built, 3,500 additional homes will have been added. The number should be 1,000, not 3,500.
Page 3, you said?
Yeah, middle of the page. The number 3,500 should be replaced with 1,000.
Okay. Any other corrections? So my motion stands with those corrections.
Yes.
Support?
Support.
Okay. Motion by Stan Alacho, support by Mr. Gordon. Any discussion? All right, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed? So motion passes 5-0. Final call of the public.
So keep it to 3 minutes, it's late. The only thing I ask is, I have one graphic to show you that relates to my statement. You have the little plug?
I don't.
You have it here.
Julie,
You'll have to hit
which one?
the, Look, sure, yes, thank you. You know, like, you're not connected then? Is there? It's lit up, pressed again. Is it red?
I don't think you're supposed to press and hold.
We might not be able to, I'm sorry. You- Yeah, you might need to connect to the Wi-Fi.
For real.
Is that right? Yeah, if you can't connect by doing that, we'll have to move on.
Is it one of your devices, the Samsung 60?
No?
Okay, well, if you just go to page, the graphic on the Tetra Tech report, which is the future land use map, which was up earlier, I think it was slide 3 on Mr. Jackson's report. The basis of all the flows for which the conclusion is made on page 4, is a formulaic question, and I think it's a question, great conversation, by the way, all good questions for Brian Rubel, great input by your planner. So the basic premise of this, all this math that went into the pipe sizing issue. The pipe sizing issue is an $8.4 million burden if it's needed, and that's the showstopper for the projects all west of 23. So that's the crux of the issue for the sewer study. The Rubel report as it stands does not answer the questions to give you what you need without further examination. So that's what we're trying to do on Monday with Brian. But the question I would urge you to ask him is this. For the mixed use, for the medium density residential portion of his calculations on table 3, 4 units per acre, he says there's 230 acres, that results in 920 REUs. It's just simple math at 260 gallons per day. The density for the Chestnut project is, in fact, 4 units per day. So
This is table 3?
it's, yeah, table 3, Dave, table 3. So 4 units per acre for MDR is great. That's a good number, I believe. Where I get into the weeds is the next two. The mixed use at 15 units per acre at 440 acres gives you 6,600 homes. He's essentially putting at 260 gallons a day, 6,600 homes equivalent of water in that pipe. That's definitely, that pipe is never designed to take that kind of flow, nor did I think it was ever envisioned by the planner or the 15 unit per acre overlay that's on this property that he's using as the basis for his calculations in the SWIM software. So my question would be to Brian Rubel is, why did you use 15 units per acre and then just take the gross acreage of all the mixed use? That gives you a highly exaggerated number of flow. I mean, this is not an engineer talking. This is simple, practical, common sense analysis of what this says. And if he can tell me that I'm wrong, I'd like to hear why I'm wrong. The last one on the industrial, if I had the graphic up, I could show you. 4 units per acre on 495 acres, that's 1,980 REUs right there. If you combine all the REUs from the three numbers on the table, you got 9,500 homes. Now, obviously, if that's the number that went into the SWIM software, all this pipe is undersized on the next page, right? It's simple. So, you know, the report is highly flawed. The outcome and the suggestion it's making to you as a planning commission is, oh, Woodfield and Chestnut have to spend $8.4 million upside all the pipe before they do anything. That's what the conclusion says. That's what I'm worried about. So this report needs a lot of work. I paid $10,000 for it. It's not worth the paper it's written on because it's all wrong. So unless we can get a good meeting with Brian Rubel, our engineers to say, hey, first, and I've asked this to your planner and your zoning administrator. I asked this in an email. It wasn't answered yet. I'm not banging anybody over that, but I need an answer, and so does Rubel. If he's calculating all these flows on 15 units per acre times all the acreage, including all the wetlands and all the roads, it can't be right, can it? That's my question for Brian Rubel. So I just urge you, somebody from the Planning Commission should be there at that Monday meeting, ask these questions. I'm going to ask them, and I'm hoping that he'll go, yep, that was a big miss. We should have taken all this into account. The graphic that I have was
Monday meeting? When's the Monday meeting?
Monday at 11. I urge everybody to do
John, I
it.
was going to talk to you after.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, because we have planning densities that he's using, and I can't get from the planner or the zoning administrator, where does 15 units per acre, can I go in here and build 15, can I build 6,600 homes on that property? Because if I can't, then all of his calculations are way overstated in terms of the flow of the pipe. So that's, that's what I wanted to get out. I hope it makes sense to you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yes, sorry, that didn't.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask Mr. Grono a question?
I mean, I'm
No, because we want to get out of here. You can talk to him afterwards, though, because it's, you know, we're not a question and answer here. So.
I'll stay if you want.
All right, thanks.
All right, comments from commissioners. I just want to make sure we keep our men and women in uniform in our thoughts and prayers. Their sacrifices daily are what's allowing us to have this freedom of expression and be able to, you know, do the things we want to do daily. So with that, the announcement of the next meeting, which is April 16th at 7 p.m., and I move to adjourn. Huh? 7 p.m. Did I say that? Oh, I said a.m.? Oh, all right. That's... All right, 7 p.m. And I motion to adjourn. All right, motion by Stanalacho, support by Gordon. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Thank you. It was a great meeting. Thanks.
I do too. That's what I live for. Should I bring a roll of 24 or 36? You know what? Depends on what I'm drawing.